Hello, I'm Gayane Alexanian. I'm sitting today with renowned designer Karim Rashid, who has traveled to Armenia from New York, bringing his expertise to the Armenian professionals within the framework of Design Fest. Karim, welcome to Armenia.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Since this is your first ever trip to Armenia, I'd like to start from the very obvious first question. What are your impressions of the country and the atmosphere of the fest?
Thank you. Thank you. I would feel very fortunate to be invited here, frankly, because I realized that maybe I have accomplished something in my career to have me invited. It's sort of a little bit of an unfair question to ask my impressions because it's such a short moment in time. We arrived at, for example, 4 a.m. Yesterday was a very busy day. And then today I saw some of the city, and then I'm working again, busy. So I don't know really, I still haven't quite grasped Armenia. My feeling is that the people, I have to say though, and really a lot of times I think the people make the place, is the people are extremely full of energy and very positive and very have this desirous need to learn and do. That's what I get the impression of, especially with the local designers, architects that I've met so far. The other side of it too is the city is it struck me as a little different than I thought because it's very organized and quite clean and well done. I don't know how to explain it. It's a nice presence. So anyway, I wish I could see more because I know the country's fascinating and interesting, but next time.
We'll come to the part of what kind of connections have you already made here, but now I want to ask you, how did it all start? How did you connect to Astrix, festival's organizer, and how did you decide to say yes to coming on?
Well, it was just a sort of a random email sent to my office. And when it was sent, my immediate reaction was, oh, Armenia. I don't know much about the country, I realize. And I always see myself as sort of very, relatively knowledgeable about things. And I thought, why don't I know enough about Armenia, in fact? I know Kim Kardashian's show on television, and I know a little bit of the history of this area, and, for example, my wife being Persian, and I've been to all the surrounding countries. So imagine this small country sort of trapped between all of this. I thought, must be quite fascinating place.
You missed Armenia while traveling around.
Yeah, well, I wasn't invited. It was the first invite. So anyway, I accepted it almost immediately. So, and also a little bit of my bucket list in my life is to try to do a talk or a lecture or do a project in every country in the world. So this is 143rd for mine. So I've still got another 52 countries to go.
That's quite impressive. You are here in the framework of Design Fest, which is actually the first ever kind of a fest in Armenia. Yes. What do you think, how Armenia is going to benefit from it?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a challenge to do a design festival. I've been to many around the world. So many design weeks, design days. Some people do it very well. A lot of times they're not done well, So I didn't know what to expect anyway. But from landing at the airport at 4 o'clock in the morning and meeting, 15 women all sort of dressed in T-shirts of the festival, and it was quite beautiful arrival. And I have to say this, and I'm being very frank, it's very well done, very organized, and the branding of it is very nice too, quite beautiful. So, hats off to Astrix and to the sponsors and everybody for putting this together, especially for a first. I go to festivals, I've been doing it for 8-9 years, and it's still something that's not quite together. So it's quite impressive. And its impact, I think, will be very important because at this point in time in the world, these sort of festivals are a necessity. Design has become a public subject, and everybody and anybody, people that are within the profession, people who feel like they know nothing about design, are all starting to have knowledge about this word, design. It's blown up in the last 30 years in a big way. Imagine when I started my profession and I told somebody I'm a designer back in, let's talk about the early 80s, they would think I'm a fashion designer immediately when you use the word design. And then they sort of knew what an architect was. They say fashion, but that sort of vague, nebulous area called design. What is design, right? So now everybody knows more or less what design is, but at the same time, they quite don't know. So these festivals are a way of sort of educating, I think, and embracing the subject matter and inspiring people to be more proactive in their situ, in their place, to be proactive, to think about how design can impact their city, their town, their country, their culture.
How do you think this is going to affect Armenia's emerging design scene?
I think it should and will have an impact because we're not anymore so isolated. Any country, we're not alone anymore. The world is very, very open, and there's a lot of information out there. So I think with all that information, also young Armenian designers, for example, or students, or et cetera, are very hungry to be exposed to even more. And it's one thing to be exposed to things digitally. It's a very different thing to be exposed physically.
You already mentioned you met a lot of professionals in your field here in Armenia. I'd like to hear what did stand out for you the most about their approach.
Well, one thing stood out was that there's a tendency, and I've observed this in many countries in the world, where we become so steeped in our place that we start to believe that we're doing something very creative or we're working hard. But at the same time, we're sort of a little bit trapped by our history or trapped by our baggage of the past.
Is this a good sign or a bad one?
No, well, let me explain. So with that said, it's sort of like, okay, for example, Yerevan, we have this place, it's full of history, but there's so much imitation of trying to make a sort of fake copy and keep the place in the past. The good side is for festivals like this, is to expose and push this idea that that's not what we should really be doing. In other words, inspire us to think that we need to actually move things forward. And there tends to be what's the word? A sort of provincial mentality in a lot of places in the world. I see this, and the local architects and designers tend to be a little trapped because they're probably capable of very progressive things or creative things, but they somehow end up over time being pushed to sort of do what the status quo of the place is, right? So a festival like this, with time, maybe after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, brings in the developers, the owners, the government people, the politicians, to start realizing what they could do to their city or their country or their culture to really elevate and elevate and push things further. One thing that's very important in the world we live in now is tourism. And many countries are starting to understand that they need to make things that are tourist attractive. This is the catalyst to stimulate the people who have, let's say, the possibilities or the privilege to start shaping a more progressive place.
Do you agree to the saying that smaller countries, they have the advantage of not being tied down by global trends, so they find unique solutions?
I don't know if that's true or not. I never really thought about that. I sometimes think it's maybe a bit the opposite. I think they because they're small, they tend to feel insecure. I was brought up in Canada. In Canada, it's a big country, but it's small mentality. And it only had, when we arrived there, 14 million people, and it was very, very provincial and very afraid and, and nervous. And I see that until today in many countries in the world. There's an insecurity, like we're not good enough or we're not capable enough, etc. So I would argue the opposite a little bit with you, that. And yet, as you said, the world is so open now that if the majority of people are being exposed to this sort of new information, they start to change this sort of provincial mentality or this closed mentality. And they start to embrace this notion of globalization, embrace the notion of progress, embrace the notion of showing off what they're capable of, what their country's capable of. Or
in your discussions with the professionals here in Armenia, what kind of a potential of that did you see here?
Well, I didn't have that many discussions. I'm here. It's been such a short visit. It's hard to know what the architects, how they're thinking, what they're up to, and so I can't really answer that.
Your philosophy has always looked toward the future and embraced the technology. I'd like to know what thoughts do you have about the future of design here in Armenia?
Okay, design is a broad term. So here in Armenia, for example, I see that how design can be embraced is through its architecture and interior, not in production of product design or furniture, because for that you need a lot of industry, and you don't have the infrastructure for that industry. But I see the potential in the sense of building here. I know that near here there's a tower going up that looked quite contemporary and quite interesting. I saw a rendering in the airport of it, and then I just saw the concrete skeleton. So you can see that there's going to be a new wave, of architecture. That is important. That's important because it changes the skyline of the place. It also brings attention to a place, and that attention brings tourism. And tourism is a big part of your economy, so it's a necessity. You have to look at this in perspective. The Eiffel Tower brings 27 million visitors a year. It's one piece of metal. What people don't realize is that when they build new, that they're not thinking about doing something provocative, radical, and pushing some boundaries, and being contemporary, by the way. They're not thinking those things, but those are the things that will have longevity, and those are the things that will bring people to see it, to experience it, right? And this is a mistake that a lot of cities, a lot of countries, a lot of places, they don't realize. Yet, there are others that are realizing this. 40 years ago, the Sheikh of Dubai, Al Rashid, had that vision, right? It was a little desert. And he said, if I build, they will come, which is what he did.
By the way, did you have a chance to walk around the capital city, Yerevan? Was there any building design that captured your attention?
Of course, I'm drawn towards, as many architects I think are drawn towards sort of brutalist structures. So for me, like the old airport, it's a very, very interesting building, right? And I saw some old brutalist sort of Soviet projects. To me, are fascinating. In the sense of new builds, no, I didn't really. Maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't see a lot. The stairs, the project of the stair with the museum in it, I thought this was quite nice, quite interesting actually. Quite interesting to build the museum sort of under it. So you have this pretense that you have no idea that there's this whole entire structure underneath it. So that's a beautiful project.
These days, there is a lot of talk about sustainable design, eco-friendly solutions. How important are these personally to you? And how do you think Armenia could grow in that field?
There's a lot of talk and little action globally. So people use these sort of buzzwords and there's a lot of greenwashing going on. And I have a lot of issues with that. I travel the world and I go to a coffee shop, and everywhere I go, I see one hole that's taking all the garbage. And I'm thinking, my God, I'm throwing a PET plastic cup in there. I'm throwing a cardboard cup that's being stained that can't be recycled. So people can talk and talk and talk, but it's not really happening, frankly. you know. Now, in new building practices, we can have standards, very high standards for doing something sustainable. I don't know if that's in place in Armenia. It's in place in very few places in the world, in fact, because it's much more costly to build, right?
Yes.
So these notions of sustainability, and I will tell you, I was brought up in Montreal, and in 1971, there was Earth Day. Canadians created Earth Day. And so in our home, we had 4 garbage cans since I was a child. So I was brought up with this idea of recycling. Then when I studied design, I found that every product and everything I do, I need to know what the end cycle is. So if I design an electric kettle, does the plastic part break off and snap off so that it can be recycled, and the stainless steel be recycled, or the aluminum go down this path? So I was educated this way. So it wasn't even a question of, I need to think sustainably now. No, it was just part of my existence. And it still is very much a part of my existence. And I want to stop hearing all the hypocrisy and the lies, and we really need to make the world sustainable. You know, it's amazing. The other day I read that they were doing heart surgery in New York, and they found plastic pieces inside the heart. You know, there's microplastics. So we need to sort of step up the game. The whole world needs to step up the game and really, really start to worry about this. At the same time, I put a project up on my Instagram, and somebody remarks, but it's made of plastic. So nobody understands all this sort of stuff. You know, a chair like that's made out of plastic could sit around here for 100 years. But you go and buy your sandwich at lunch in a plastic container, that you do that. And you go buy your coffee at Starbucks and you do that. That's the culprit, not the plastic chair, right? So everybody's confused. People see a wood chair, so their mentality is, that's sustainable. Not true whatsoever. The majority of knockdown furniture, like IKEA, etc., is made of MDF. MDF is full of toxic resins. Full. So the world is full of these toxic resins. Nobody's saying anything because they're seeing the top layer looks like wood. You know? That's greenwashing.
Your work spans over dozens of countries. What do you think what makes design universal? And what do you think can only come from local culture?
Yes. Well, you know, right now you see the differentiation of local culture tends to be in craft, not in design. But it could be in design. So I was at the hotel and I thought to myself, what was the project what was I saying about Armenia? Are they producing? Good example was, I thought, you know what? Is Armenia in the trade of sewing and fashion, you know, for example? Because there could be growing out of Armenia some great fashion designers if they have the resources. So you know, how can I say it? There's a potential to do design that's completely different, that's comes from, let's say, the DNA of Armenians, and have an impact on the rest of the world. No question about it. And vice versa. Let's take a country like Sweden. I always talk about Sweden. Why? 8 million people. I can name you 30 global brands coming out of that tiny little country. So we all have the potential. Every country, every culture, we have the potential to do these things.
We need the work to be done.
Yes, and you have to have, you know, the Hebrew word chutzpah? Chutzpah means, sorry to say this, balls. You got to have balls to say, I'm going to do a startup. I'm going to do this. I have a great idea for this. And this is the time to do it because the entrepreneur has been empowered. And you can sell anything very inexpensive online. And you don't need overhead, and you don't need inventory, you don't need, you know, huge capital to start things, right? Everybody and anybody now. That's why the whole world is participating. And there's interesting things coming from all over the place now. It's a very interesting time we're living in because this is the world now of opportunity.
Yes. And let's go to the next question. You often say, find new languages, new aesthetics, break boundaries. Yes. After your time at Design Fest in Yerevan, do you have any new ideas?
I don't know. These things. I usually, when I get on the plane, everything sort of comes to me.
Let us know.
Okay, we'll do that. Yes.
Okay, and you often remind us that projects shape styles and festivals are also projects too, right? How do you think the design Fest Yerevan can help shape Armenia's creative future?
Festivals are about gathering, about human interaction, about sharing ideas, about being inspired, and then everybody breaks off and does things. So let's see, you tell me the outcome of this eventually, That's why we'll always need festivals, and that's why they're growing around the world. That's why everybody now is trying to have a festival of design, because it's a short period of time. That a 2 or 3 day festival, it can be more inspiring than doing a 2-year master's in a university.
Do you think you will come back to Armenia?
If I am invited, certainly. Why not?
Thank you.